right? Because if you give everybody an award, not everybody's working equal, right?
Right,
You
right.
know, you violate trust on the ones that are leading and busting their ass and being good teammates.
If you're just going to not do something until it's perfect, or you're going to wait to launch it before it's perfect, it's never going to happen. And so if you want to accomplish something, at some point you have to say, just like you said, good enough.
A group of people can accomplish anything if nobody worries about who gets the credit.
Welcome to the Science of Leadership, the podcast dedicated to helping you become a better leader. Here, you'll gain valuable knowledge, hear inspiring stories, and learn the scientific principles that promote exceptional leadership. I'm Tom Collins, your host, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on this journey to becoming a better leader. This is an episode you absolutely will not want to miss. Today, I am excited to have General Gus Perna on the podcast as we discuss what it means to be responsible and accountable to our role as leaders. General Perna is a distinguished graduate of Valley Forge Military Academy and earned degrees in business management and logistics from the University of Maryland and Florida Institute of Technology. He commanded soldiers during Operation Iraqi Freedom and later served as commanding general of the U.S. Army's Materiel Command, overseeing 190,000 personnel and a $175 billion budget. In 2020, when our nation needed a vaccine to be developed and delivered across the country, he led Operation Warp Speed, delivering the COVID-19 vaccine ahead of schedule. General Perna's numerous honors include the Defense Distinguished Service Medal, Legion of Merit, and Bronze Star. He is now the Chief Operating Officer of DEFCON AI. General, welcome to the Science of Leadership, and thanks for being here. Also, thank you for your service to our nation.
Tom, it's a real pleasure. Thanks for including me in the vast number of great leaders that you've interviewed over the last months, years. So it's an honor for me. Over.
Yes, sir. Well, I've really been looking forward to this because the prior conversations we have had just been really great. In those, one of the things that you said repeatedly is that we as leaders have to be responsible and accountable to our role. For our listeners, what do you mean when you say that?
Well, a phrase that I've used often to kind of reflect that is audio has to match video. In other words, it's got to be more than just say and do as I say. It's got to be, you're the example. Your guidance has to be clear and concise. But more importantly, you have to stand behind that guidance. One, in execution, two, in supporting those that are doing that, and three, in the results. At the end of the day, I believe the leader is responsible and accountable for the results that are achieved. Many leaders coin the phrase or utilize the phrase, if it went wrong, it's my fault. If it went right, it's everybody else's success, or something similar to that. And, unfortunately, not everybody that calls himself a leader stands behind that type of phrase and or really truly executes it. And so I personally always found working for the leaders where audio and video matched really powerful. I would run through walls. I wouldn't fail just because I wouldn't want to let those people down. And that's the type of leader I wanted to be. If I told you to do something, I was going to resource it. I was going to prioritize it. I was going to support you. And then I was going to be responsible and accountable in either way. If it goes great, it's their success. If it doesn't, it was my fault. And it's just the way I thought it should be.
Yes, sir. I appreciate that. It's what I like to say is leaders take the blame and give the credit. And so yes. I think we are absolutely, that's our role. I wish there were more people in society who behave that way, but certainly I agree with you 100% on this. And it's funny, the themes that run through when one has the privilege to get to know on some level 51 4-star officers. Dave Rodriguez, that was a phrase that he used specifically, was the audio's got to match the video.
Yeah, it's so important. And, leadership varies from when you're younger to older. The volume of things that you have to take on, the responsibility of organizations, really can be of great magnitude. And sometimes it could be overwhelming, right? And so the ones, in my mind, the ones that were really being true leaders throughout their career, where they were in charge of 10 people or 190,000 people, the ones that have it in their core audio will always match video. The ones who were acting their way through the roles, for lack of a better term, are the ones that get caught up on this, right? Because the sheer responsibility as it grows really can become overwhelming if it's not part of your foundation. And so I always held myself accountable to, thinking bigger than myself, bigger than my organization, to do what was right. And that just meant I was going to be responsible and accountable. I mean, one example that maybe some of your listeners and readers will relate to is, when I was doing the vaccine, we were ready to deliver. We knew the FDA was about to make a decision, and what we knew and what I said was we would deliver the vaccine 24 hours after the decision made by the FDA. We also believed that we were going to receive roughly 10 million doses of vaccine. And we had told people to plan for 10 million pro rata across the United States because everybody was going to get an equal proportion from the Pacific territories, Alaska, Maine, Puerto Rico, and everything in the middle. And so 10 million was our number. But we also thought a minimum number would be 5 million, and we told people to plan accordingly. And we gave the numbers. Well, the day the decision was made at the FDA to approve, we received an update. We were only going to receive 5 million. It created a lot of chatter, right? Because the country was in a bad place. Unfortunately, people were gravely ill and dying, and hope was all about getting this vaccine out. And so, the number that was heard was 10 million, right? That's what people heard. Well, that was not the case. And there's reasons why that was not the case. And I'm not going to go through all those reasons, but it turned out that it was 5 million. And so the following day, we were in a media event. We had distributed within 24 hours, like I said. It went across the country virtually flawlessly and received and implemented just really remarkably well because of the great team effort, right? People were stuck on 5 million versus 10 million. And so when I held the media event, the media was just bam, 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 bam. Why 5 million? Why 5 million? Why 5 million? And I made the decision that it was my responsibility, right? Whether people didn't read the charts, 10 million, 5 million, whether people didn't understand it was a planning factor, whether, whatever the issue was, I was in charge. And so, I basically said something to the effect of, hey, I know you don't get this a lot, but I'm just telling you, it's my fault. The problem's been fixed and we're moving forward. So if you want to blame somebody, blame me, but ready to go.
Right.
And that's how it ended. So.
Yeah. No, I think that's brilliant. Because I think people have become so used to blame shifting and finger pointing and all these sorts of things that when we as leaders say, that's on me, that's my fault, I did that. Even though you're not the person who's manufacturing the vaccine, you're not the person at the assembly line that's doing that, or quality assurance person that says, hey, these doses were left out of the refrigerator or whatever it may be. We've got to throw them all away so the numbers change. You weren't involved in that at all, but you said, no, buck stops here. I'm the person responsible, and I think that speaks volumes.
I was lucky. I had parents that, taught us that, lived by it, right? So it was easy to watch them and emulate accordingly. I've had great leaders, right, throughout my career that acted that way. So it's not rare. I mean, it's not unheard of that leaders do that. With that said, I always admired the ones that held themselves accountable in the toughest times, right? And it can
Yes,
and
sir.
it can vary, right? It could be something detrimental happens inside the organization, with people, or the organization fails something miserably, or it's about your own personal success and accolades, right? It varies, but at the end of the day, it's still the same decision, right? You got to be responsible and accountable as you move forward. And I know you talk about this because I've seen other parts of what you've done. One of the hardest things to do as a leader is really build trust, up and down. But the fastest thing to lose is trust. It's really
Yes,
hard to
sir.
build. You can really lose it really fast. And the fastest way I can think of losing it is when you're not responsible and accountable.
Yeah. Our listeners will know that this idea of trust just keeps coming up in interview after interview, episode after episode. It has really been hit on a lot, and fundamentally, and we've covered the science of why that is in previous episodes. And so, yes, absolutely, trust is just intrinsic, interwoven in the idea of leadership. I remember you sharing with me a story of a conversation that I think really exemplifies being responsible and accountable to the role. Was this conversation you had with the mother of one of your soldiers before deploying, and I was wondering if you might be willing to share that with our listeners.
I had many of them, but I do remember the story that I share with you because it resonates with me. Even to this day, I can still remember exactly where I was, the dialogue that was occurring, and I can visualize it like it was a movie I just watched. And we were getting ready. I was a battalion commander. I was a lieutenant colonel. I was a battalion commander. It was roughly about 700 people in the battalion. It's core strength of 500, but we were getting additions as we were getting ready to deploy to Iraq and be part of the invasion in 2003. And we had recently gone through all of our, immediate administration of all the soldiers to get them ready. And we've loaded all of our equipment. And we were just really waiting for our turn on planes. And we knew we had about a week to 10 days, give or take. And so what we did is we encouraged people to take leave and or, have their parents or family members come visit us, to kind of, have this interaction. So what I didn't want is this frozen middle. We can't do anything, let's take a little risk and do it right. And I had great leaders that supported this, right? It wasn't just my brilliant idea. The brigade commander and the division commander were two remarkable leaders. What we had at this on this occasion was numerous family members that were walking around our area, getting to know people. And as I walked up the steps to my headquarters, there was a family there, and I was introduced by the officer to the parents. And it was very nice, very cordial, and but yet, as you can imagine, right? These are parents who are with their son or daughter, and the media is running off about what this means and what's war going to be like, and probably never seen anything like this, since
Right.
91, and so they're off, and people get watch the news for all the right reasons, and. And I could just see in the mother's face, that she was just dying to ask me a question. And so we talked a little bit, and I said, hey, is there anything else you'd like to ask me? And sure as crap, she came right out. She says, I don't have anything to ask you. I want you to promise me that you're going to bring back my child,
Mm-hmm.
that my child's going to live through this. And I wasn't surprised because, quite frankly, I can see that question,
Mm-hmm.
but it was the first time it happened to me. An immediate answer could have been, yep, I promise. But that
Sure.
would not have been, that would not have
Yeah.
been truthful.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I told her is I said, look, I can promise you that the best training has the best training. The officer is ready to do their job. You should be proud of everything, that they've
Mm-hmm.
sacrificed and have done. And we will go do this, and I will lead from the front, and I will hold myself accountable to everything we do in our mission. But I can't promise you that, every,
Yeah.
the officer is going to be all right.
Yeah.
I could see as we sat there and I walked through it, I could see her face. She really, in my mind, she appreciated that my comments. And I could see, she didn't. It's hard. How do I articulate this? It wasn't about she wanted the guarantee. I think she was really looking at me
Yeah.
to give her some confidence.
Right. She
And
wanted to
I saw
trust
that.
you.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was one of the most remarkable things that ever occurred to me, quite frankly. Um, you know, Now just for the audience, the officer did come home, right, and has a great life and a great family, and I still talk to this person. What is that? 25 years later.
Well, I'm glad you added that that footnote there. I'm sure there are plenty of folks wondering about that. So that's good. There's another story that I think gets at that ties in with this the one that you just shared and gets at this idea of being responsible and accountable to the role. And it was where a certain officer had joined you from a different unit, and the refrain that you had said was redo, redo, redo. If you remember that one, would you mind sharing that one just and how it fits into this concept of being responsible and accountable to the role as leader?
Sure. Okay, so well before we thought, well before it was before 9/11, right?
Mhm.
It was the previous year, and I had taken battalion command, and in our rotation of personnel to the unit, you receive and you lose so many people a year because they go to school, they go do other jobs, etc. They get out of the
Mhm.
army or they're new to the army, etc. And so we had our normal influx of that throughout the summer. And we were getting ready to go to what we call the National Training Center,
Mhm.
which is where we go and we execute force on force training. And it's a significantly, it is a hard training event. It takes, everybody needs to know their jobs. Everybody needs to be physically fit. Everybody needs to be, just ready to go. Leaders need to be operating at the top. It's stressful physically and mentally, but it's the closest thing we can do to replicate actual war,
Mhm.
right? So we knew that was on the calendar and that was coming up, and we had to go do that. Now, my mindset to that event was not that, hey, this is really good training and we'll learn a lot. My mindset was my purpose is to lead this battalion and go support the brigade and the division to fight and win our nation's wars, right? That was my
Mhm.
purpose. And so as the commander, what I was holding us accountable to, myself and the individuals and the teams, was that we were going to be well trained, we were going to be physically fit, we were going to mentally put ourselves through so many experiences as much as possible that if something comes up, we knew how to react. And we were going to execute at the highest standards, right? to that end. Because what is the fallout of that? The fallout is that you're not training, but you're actually in combat. And if you're not operating at that level, at personal and teams, the highest level, then people die.
Right.
And people dying, unfortunately, is a fact of war. With that said, I believe that if you train hard and you hold people accountable to the highest standards, right, then you have a better chance of living. You can't wipe out everything, but you have a better chance of surviving and going through that. And one of the things I used to tell my team was the difference between being ready and reacting at war will be measured in lost lives, right? And so I held myself accountable to that. So that's setting the situation. So we were out in the field and we were training on what I set the conditions on is I wanted to be able to take our unit, which was a logistics sustainment unit, and I wanted to move it from point A to point B, and I wanted to be able to echelon it, and I wanted to be able to rapidly occur. I wanted priorities of work to happen. So, we get in, we set up the defense, we establish communication, we create the security, wire, concertina wire. We begin operations, then we eat, and then we, sleep, roughly, in that order. And it's a really difficult task. I've been in many units over the years. I've been in them where it's not run well, and I've been in where it's run well. To me, it was all about defining the priority of work. Every individual knew what their job was. Every organization knew what their job was as an organization. And then we just built on it collectively in the unit. Well, we were, this unit had never really gone through it this way. Not it's just the way I did it, the way I chose to do it with them. And we went out to the field, and I had several training things I wanted to achieve. But each training thing was going to get achieved the standard first before I went to the next one.
Yes, sir.
And one of the things we worked on first was how do you echelon movement, right? And we got past that. And then the second thing is how do you set up this massive organizational effort, which provides fuel, ammo, food, repair parts, maintenance, laundry and bath, right? Medical support, maintenance support. How do you set up this little city in such a way that it deploys and gets reset up, right? And for me, it was standards and execution to the priorities and a time that I set. I said it'll be set up in 4 hours, period, which is an unheard of standard.
Yes, sir.
So we did it, and the first couple times, and it was a hot day. It was it was a hot couple of days. It was hot. It was hot. The sun was out, and we did
Fort
it.
Irwin can be hot.
Yeah, well, we weren't at Irwin yet, though. We were at.
Oh, you weren't? Okay.
We were at Fort Carson, Colorado.
Okay.
And it was very hot. Anyway. So we did it once, and it was really easy. I just said, okay, not good enough. Go do it again, which meant, go all the way back, to the starting block, where all the trucks are loaded, and we come in at echelon. That meant repacking everything and getting back to the thing. So then
I was excited about that.
And, then it came up again, and I said, okay, no way, not good enough. People really thought they had it that time. I said, no, we've missed it. You're not done with your priorities of work. The standard of the work is not right. And we're well over 4 hours. Repack, do it again. And then the third time hit, and I was standing by the battalion operation TOC. It's a big area. It was one click by one click by one click. And and I was standing by the talk where I had everybody involved because there was a thought process that certain levels and ranks didn't have to do things. And what I said is you're not making time because you're not utilizing everybody, and we're not being a team. And now I'm getting a little upset myself, right? Because I
Yes, sir.
I always pride myself in not being a screamer or a yeller, but I was starting to get a little, really, we can't figure this out on the third try. So I said, hey, not good enough. And the moans and groans came about. And I said, hey, everybody back to the starting blocks. Well, I had one officer that person had kind of gotten to, was working their ass off to do it right. But collectively as a team, we had to survive together. Didn't matter what one person did. We all had to do it, right? We all had to collectively be at the right standard at the right time. Otherwise, the enemy finds the weakness and comes in and exploits that. And so I was with my sergeant major at the time, who was a senior enlisted non-commissioned officer. And I said, hey, you handle all this, get them back over there, and my XO. And I went and talked to the officer. I pulled the officer aside. And what I recognized was this person has never been through this type of stress, physical stress, right? And accountable, not intellectual, because this individual was incredibly smart, but the physical stress, the team approach, it's got to be bigger than just you. It has to be collective, right? And yes, I know what you did was perfect and spot on, but doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. And so, what I did was just, what any good leader would do is instead of just saying, get your ass back over there, I don't care, you're going to do what I say, I took the time to walk the person through. I love to tell you, it was maybe 10 minutes of conversation. And I said, hey, here's the deal, right? I am responsible and accountable in execution for our mission to support the rest of the brigade and the division. And then I am responsible and accountable to you to make sure you've been trained at the right standard, so that you have the greatest potential to, one, do your job, and two, to live. Right. And I'm not gonna lower my standards because it's a hot day. Right. Well, we got to figure out how to get through that. We got to figure out how to be better teammates. We got to figure out how to do things differently if we can't get it right, But those are the two things I'm holding myself accountable to, which means I'm holding you accountable to it. And, you can see begrudgingly, right? Tired, sweating, soaking wet, right? Physically, tired, right? That beat that, the person understood and went and did it. And, just to give you a little, that was just daylight training. We went to the next step was we had to do it at nighttime. You know how hard that is with no lights? Anyway, and that officer really is one of my favorite people in the world, mainly because of that situation, didn't quit, right? Went and redid it. Not the happiest person initially, but, went and redid it and turned out to be a remarkable officer in combat. And I still talk to that officer 25 years later.
Yeah. So. That's great. This idea of remaining responsible and accountable is so important, I think, to effective leadership. And I think, as I've sort of mentioned before, nobody really trusts anyone when things don't go well. Is always shifting the responsibility and accountability onto others. We tend not to like blame shifters. We don't trust them. Research studies have validated that instinct, but when a leader consistently takes responsibility for the decisions and actions, it really builds trust in the team, which, as we've touched on in previous episodes of the podcast, as well as this one's already, that's elemental in effective leadership. And I would say for the listeners, the Leadership Challenge, which I recommended previously, does a good job of covering how taking responsibility increases a leader's credibility and the trust others have in them. So some folks may want to check into if you haven't looked at the leadership challenge before.
And I gave an element of example, right? But
Yes, sir.
there's other ways where trust could have been violated in that situation. Like if I sat in the air conditioned room and told everybody what we were going to do, and then,
Yes, sir.
I stayed in the office and sent everybody to the field, right?
Yes, sir.
And I would just show up for one moment and then I'd say, not good enough, and I'd leave, right?
Right.
I stayed with them the whole time. I was actually part of the work party, right? I had jobs I had to do. I had things I had to, in my role as a commander, right? And to that end, right? So that's really, there's things that you have to do as a leader, and you just got to really be responsible for those things. But I could have violated their trust by not being there and just giving orders. I
Sure.
could have violated their trust by yelling and screaming and, belittling people, right?
Right.
I mean, when people are busting their ass trying to do what's right, and they're learning and they want to be accountable, yelling and screaming and profanity is just demeaning. And
Right.
you and I've talked about this, right? The greatest leaders that I worked for were the ones that were calm, the ones who could whisper in your ear and bring chills to the back of your neck because you knew you let them down, right?
Yeah.
And so you could violate trust that way. Another way to violate trust was, when it's time to recognize who really were the great leaders in doing the hard task, right? Because if you give everybody an award, not everybody's working equal, right?
Right.
You violate trust on the ones that are leading and busting their ass and being good teammates. So you have to be really good at, recognizing those people, not demeaning others, but making sure they're learning, right? But, if you hand out a medal to everybody, the medal is worthless. And you're going to lose people's trust, right? And so, besides the circumstances that I went through, there's a myriad of ways that you have to lead your way through these challenges to maintain trust.
Yeah, you hit on there a number of things that came up during my study, and a few that really are interdigitated is this concept of lead from the front, be the example. Those are two of them. And then the third thing, sort of making this 3-cord rope, if you will, is don't ask somebody to do something you aren't willing to do yourself. And so you exemplified that by being out there in the heat, working alongside people, sweating just like they were, getting the job done. Because every time you said redo, 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 that meant you had to stay out there longer too.
Oh, it was a bag of suck. Trust me. I would tell you though, and I'm pretty proud of this. I really am. The team, the mental attitude, how many young leaders, really learned a lot. Because I had to go through a process of getting rid of some people who just were not understanding where I was going. I had to bring in some new people. But all of this, all that hard work, when we went into the invasion, right? I mean, I had young lieutenants leading convoys from Kuwait all the way up to Baghdad, to Balad, to the Iranian border, back, right? I mean, these young men and women, right, were leading 30 vehicle convoys responsible for lives, getting there, doing their jobs when they got there, right? That was not the case, right, 18 months earlier. But we did it. The team did it, right? Not me. I mean, the team did it. Everybody, because of that effort, right? And I'm proud to say, that we brought everybody home from that, the invasion. Right. Because,
that's
and I think it's because of the approach that we took, the collective approach and the buy-in, from my leaders and then the soldiers.
Yes, sir. Yeah, that's a real testament to maintaining that standard and being sure that everybody is able to do what's required of them. So,
and this, right? It's just a simple soldier, but like Iraq. And I only went in to support Afghanistan. I never really was, I fly in deal with talk to leaders and, figure out what they needed.
Yes, sir.
I wasn't in that country. It's a different theater,
Mm-hmm.
but in Iraq, temperatures were extreme. Didn't
Sure.
matter day or night. I mean, they were so extreme, and hydration was important. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was just hard, right? And we were wearing combat gear, and
Right.
an easy thing to do was to take off your vest, right? Because just
Right.
dropping that vest reduced
Mm-hmm.
weight. You were cooler because you were wet, and what little breeze. I mean, but the standard of wearing that vest, no matter what, was the standard. And I would
Right.
argue that as individuals and as organizations, sometimes the standard was not maintained. What's the result of that? Somebody could die, right?
Right.
And so it starts at the individual. It has to go through the teams and the companies and the battalions and brigades and divisions.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just, as we started this conversation, saying something and expecting it to happen. You have to lead your way through it. You have to build
Mm-hmm.
to the standard. You have to maintain the standard. You have to hold people accountable to the standard. And it's about executing when nobody's looking, right?
Yeah.
That really, when it clicked.
Yes, sir. Yeah. So many, just rich leadership lessons already. I wanted to kind of shift gears a little bit. You touched on Operation Warp Speed earlier, but I think perhaps the most visible, at least to the general public, the most visible leadership role you had during your career was when you oversaw Operation Warp Speed. Can you share with us what it was like to lead that endeavor and some of the ways you had to be responsible and accountable, other than that one media event that you were mentioning, but ways that you had to be responsible and accountable in the midst of what was an incredibly challenging situation that was highly matrixed with all sorts of organizations across the country?
So I just want to clarify. I was a co-leader with Dr. Monsef Salawi, this brilliant, scientist. This man he's just done so much for our country and the world in the vaccines that he's developed.
Yes, sir.
He's been responsible for, and co-leading with him was just special. We it was remarkable. It was one of those things. We literally met walking out to the Rose Garden, right, on 18 May, and we've become what I'd like to believe is lifelong friends now, right? We worked with each other's strengths. I mean, he clearly was the world-renowned expert in, vaccines, what was going to be the best way to approach it. He defined, how, we were going to go with 6 vaccines, two each for, 3 different types so that we could mitigate risk and figure out which would work best. He was the intellectual giant who understood what was going on in the nation, but could, just lead us to that part. And he taught me so much, quite frankly, because, I couldn't spell Health and Human Services, HHS, or, that was not my world.
Sure.
I'm being tongue in cheek here, but, I
Right.
knew organizations, but, and he spent a lot of time teaching me, about just, programmatics of, how vaccines work, how to select the best ones, to mitigate the risk, how to assess what we had the best chance to really develop and do that. So I'd be remiss if I did not highlight that. And, not that you were, trying to separate me from that. But when I came on as the co-leader, I was told to focus on the distribution. But what we quickly learned is that we had to increase manufacturing. We had a great individual helping us with that, civilian working on that. We had to control supply chains. We had to figure out the distribution. We had to figure out administration, because we're talking about a volume of, roughly 240 million people out of the 320 million people that existed, right? All adults.
Yes,
We had to figure out distribution, accountability, like, how do we proportionally give it to everybody equally, right? So there's no haves and have-nots. We had to overcome, ultra cold temperature requirements. We had to overcome, needle and syringe sizes. We had to overcome, how do you notify the American people? So there was a myriad of things that we just were not ready to do. We didn't have a plan. We didn't have a structure to do it. We didn't have the financial backing. It wasn't established. The flu vaccine, albeit, a great effort every year, is one it's not offensive. It's more defensive. It's more reactionary. It's almost a 2-year process. And what we were trying to do was go on the offense. The analogy is, we got less than 2 minutes and we got to drive the length of the field. And if we don't get into the end zone, not only will we lose, but there'll be a lot of people that will die. Right.
Right.
And time mattered. What also mattered is that, we weren't going to violate, right, the rules, anything that would safety impact the vaccine. Right. We had, our country is the greatest in many things. One of the great things is the way we, the FDA monitors and approves medicines, that we take and put in our bodies, medicines and vaccines. And so we weren't going to violate that. Right. My job was build a team, collaborate with the smartest people in academia and industry. Right. And figure out how to bend the laws of physics. And the way we did that was
all great tasks.
We bought the vaccine before it was approved. And so we could go through all the steps, right, and get it all ready so that when it was approved, I could deliver it 24 hours later. If we didn't do that, if we didn't take that risk, if we didn't have leaders that I worked for, right? The SecDef, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, the President of the United States, both presidents, as it turned out to be. If we didn't have leaders that were going to risk financial, and give me priority, we wouldn't have been able to do that, right? And so because I had leaders that were supporting the mission they gave me, because my approach was to build a team to the mission, right? Make it small and flat. Right. Don't worry about having secretaries and aides and the bureaucracy of all that. Just, put myself in the decision loop, right? In the execution, planning, decision loop, right? Work with the best from academia, work with the best from, the scientist world, work with the best from industry. We could get this done. Well, when you do that, when you're doing all that, as I just described, you really got to check all your egos at the door, right? I mean, there was no doubt in my mind I was in charge, co-leading with Monsef. But when it came to everything, manufacturing, supply chain, distribution, administration, right, seeing ourselves, I held myself responsible and accountable to that. That was my job. And so we had to work our way through the bureaucracies of things. We had to work our way through people who thought they knew one way, organizations that thought they knew one way. And we just had to keep pressing, to create the effects we needed to do to get to where we needed to be, right? At the end of the day, there was nothing short of vaccine in arms, right, for the American people.
Yes, sir.
And so the phrase I coined with my team was, we're going to lead from behind. We're not going to stand up and beat our chest and say, do what I do, because we weren't the experts. We were the experts at operationalizing things to effects. We were not the medical experts. We were not, how to produce experts. We were not even the distribution ultra cold experts. We were not the administration experts. What we did is we put all these things, all these objectives together, connected them, and drove operational effects, without violating, our one, red line, no safety things. So, we figured out how to bend the laws of physics. We drove operations to create effects. We built a team, that was very diversified in talent and as individuals. And we just held ourselves responsible and accountable to get there. But I tell people all the time, I'm mildly interested in that. Your ego's out in front of you, right? If you want to go out and come back in, I'll listen. But otherwise, go home. I'll get somebody new. Because egos, I didn't have time for, if that makes sense.
Sir. Yes, sir. No, it's this idea of lead from behind, and I think that's striking, because so often in the military context, we certainly say lead from the front and advise any leader to lead from the front. That is to be present and active in the discomfort and danger, as General Dempsey would say, that the people that you're leading are going through. But here, what you're conveying is this idea of subjugating, if you will, one's ego and status for the sake of accomplishing the mission, and listening to the people who actually have the expertise and the knowledge. It reminds me of when I talked to General Vince Brooks, and he was on the Science of Leadership earlier, and I love that man. But he was telling me a story, and I'm sure you know it, about when the dining facility was struck in Iraq, and he was there, and all these casualties and so forth, and how when he got to the combat support hospital, basically, he acted as a human IV pole. He was just holding a bag of IV fluid.
Exactly.
And that's the image when you say leading from behind. It's that idea. Servant leadership, in a sense, really in a sense of, this isn't about me, it's about getting the job done.
And it's really the foundation. I mean, I got chills you just reflecting on that, because I know Vince Brooks. He's one of the greatest leaders and men I've ever had the pleasure of knowing.
Phenomenal.
And he's spent so much time making me better. Trust me. But that's exactly right. I would present to you in that situation, everybody knew who Vince Brooks was. They all knew he was a division commander. Every single person, whether they were on the gurney being worked on or they were the doctor doing the work, they all knew. Sure. And that must have went a mile, right? In morale and enthusiasm and can do. And it sucks what happened, but let's figure out where we're going, right? And, it's going to be about the team, and we're going to get this done. And I'm going to be here with you. Well, that's exactly right. And I would argue in my thing, everybody knew who I was, and everybody knew I was going to be responsible and accountable. Everybody knew that I was not going to settle for, we're working on it. That was not going to be a good answer. But everybody also knew that I was going to listen, to what had to be said. Now, I'll tell you truthfully, once the decision was done, we were pressing, right?
Sure.
And, to your earlier comment, or it was a previous phone call I had, I said, hey, is this going to violate our one rule? And they said, no, sir. And I said, okay, then we're going to go do it. We're not waiting for perfection.
Yes, sir.
So,
yes, sir.
It was a remarkable team. It was a great effort. And, we should be proud that we're in a country that, where our leaders are two presidents, and I worked for both of them, gave me a mission, gave me the resources, and gave me the priority to go get it done. And then we had to know with all in the nation to figure it out. No other nation did what we did. I mean, everybody says that. No other nation can do what we do. Well, I'm just telling you, we're the only ones that did it.
Right.
We're the only ones that did it. Right. I'm just.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the whole world had the problem.
Right. Yes, sir.
Exactly. And then we went and helped the whole world. Right. So.
Yeah. That's so rich. As you talk about OWS, so rich with regard to this idea of being responsible and accountable to your role, and to what that means and what that looks like. Just coming back to this idea of sharing some of the science behind how that affects the people we lead and our ability to lead in that. In addition to the increased trust and credibility that we talked about that comes when we remain responsible and accountable to the role, there are a number of other valuable effects it has on our ability to lead. A couple worth noting, I think, are improved decision-making and higher organizational performance. There was this study by Drew and West that found when leaders are the ones responsible and accountable for the outcome, we make more thoughtful and measured decisions, which makes sense, right? If we're the ones who are going to get the blame, we're going to try to do our very best. And so I think for leaders, no matter what field you're in, if you're out there and you want to have the best outcome for your organization, you've got to be the person who remains responsible and accountable, because that will help you to do a better job of leading and making the right decisions. So when we know that the proverbial buck stops here, we will review past decisions, we'll analyze our current risk, and we make better decisions. And then there's Jim Collins' finding in the book Good to Great, I'm sure that most folks have read, that organizations with leaders who are accountable often experience better performance. And that's because they're committed to driving the results and aligning team efforts. So those are just a couple of the scientifically proven positive effects of being responsible and accountable to our roles as leaders.
I've tried to emulate that my whole life, not with perfection, but as Vince Lombardi say, strive for perfection and settle for good enough.
Yes, sir.
And, first you got to start with holding yourself accountable to that, that very high standard. And then success builds a lot of teammates.
Yes, sir.
And, I think it catches on, right? It really does.
Yes, sir.
So I've always tried to hold myself to that end. And I try to be with people that are like that. I don't like being with people who are not like that. So
Right. There's something off-putting, to say the least, that comes from somebody who does everything they can to shirk their responsibility. I think it must be that's part of our genetic makeup that has helped us as a social creature over time, is that we can spot people like that, and we know that they're not good for us or for our little group of humans or whatever it is. And so there's this almost repulsion, I think, that occurs for most people. Now, there's some that are pathologic, but for most people, when we see that, we're repulsed by it, right? And so we turn that off and move away from it. There was something that you were mentioning that I want to share, just because it's this idea that came to me yesterday. I was working on making a video to try to help the faculty where I work understand how to be better at time management, and it was 5 keys to better time management. And so one thing that I hit on, so Voltaire is known as having said, perfect is the enemy of good, right? And so in the video, I said, Collins, it was a quote from me, but perfect is the enemy of accomplished.
Huh?
Because if you're just going to not do something until it's perfect, or you're going to wait to launch it before it's perfect, or whatever it is, it's never going to get launched. It's never going to be ready. It's never going to happen. And so if you want to accomplish something, at some point you have to say, just like you said, good enough.
I know you've probably read Hal Moore, and I'm sure other leaders have talked about it. This is a specific, but to your topic there, one of my favorite Hal Moore quotes is, when he's asked, he's not asked specifically about time management. He's asked about, how do you know where to be at the right time, at the right place?
Yes,
and his response was, I just kept asking myself, what am I doing that I should not do? And what should I do that I'm not doing?
Yes,
and I challenge every leader that worked for me and myself to be constantly thinking through that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we spend too much time on easy things. We spend too much time trying to get to perfection. We don't spend enough time where we're uncomfortable. We don't spend time where there's some problems, So that simple phrase really
Yes, sir.
was a game changer for me as a young leader. When I first read his book, and I was a lieutenant colonel, battalion commander, when the movie came out and I read his book, man, that helped me so much. So I would just
Yes,
pass
sir.
that to you.
Yes, sir. And for the listeners who aren't familiar with military history, that's Lieutenant General Hal Moore, who was a hero in Vietnam and the Battle of Ia Drang there. So,
Exactly.
well, General Perna, one question that I always try to land on before the end of an episode is, how do we make this practical for our listeners? That is, how does someone build that ability to be responsible and accountable to their role?
I don't want to oversimplify it because it takes, in my mind, it really takes moral and physical courage to do that. And that's, we're people. It's easier said than done. But how I captured it and I try to relate it to others in your decision-making process, whether to say yes or no, or to go do or not go do, I coach to pause and think, am I doing this? Is this bigger than me? Is this bigger than my company, my organization? And if the answer to those questions are yes, then you should go do it. If the answers are no, then don't do it, right? I mean, this is about being responsible and accountable, but that's how I kind of define it in a simple yes or no matrix. If you want to ask, you need a cheat sheet. Is this decision bigger than me? And but then you got to ask the second one though too, because it can be bigger than you, but you need to make sure it's what's best for, like I used to tell battalion commanders, your decision is about what's best for the brigade. Brigade commanders is about what's best for the division. Division's about what's best for the corps. Corps is about what's best for the army, right? Hey, two-star general, I hear you, right? You need more money, but what's best for the army is that you figure out how to do this, right? At this level, right? I need you to be innovative, adaptive, and agile, right? Stop telling me you can't do it unless you get more money. Stop telling me that you're at risk if you don't get more money, right? I mean, I need to know what has to be mitigated. I'll help prioritize. I'll help resource. But what's best for the Army, division commander, corps commander. So I always run people through that drill. I run myself through that drill. I actually grade on that perspective. In other words, if I'm writing a letter of recommendation or an evaluation on people, I always reflect if they are capable of thinking bigger than themselves and their organization. And I'll articulate it, to present them in what I consider, better light. But it's always helped me make the right decision, because you don't necessarily, you could be in an environment where your instincts aren't kicking in right away. You could be in an environment where, you're by yourself. We all make a lot of decisions by ourselves, right? And then we justify them in public. Well, when you're by yourself, it's tough to go against the angel and the devil, right? So you got to deal in some facts. And that's the way I always work my way through it. Is it bigger than me? Is it bigger than my organization?
Yeah. And then just having the character to actually make the right call when the time comes. And I think that's so valuable. You mentioned that at the outset, and I think that's so valuable. Previously, one of the 4-stars that I've talked with during my study was just said that by watching others, seeing how it's done, that helped him to be able to act accordingly when the time came.
Oh yeah.
One sort of bonus last thing here, I think, before we wrap up for the listeners. Previously, you told me part of your leadership process of being responsible and accountable was always to ask yourself the question, am I using everything that's available to me? Just with a little bit of time that we've got left, can you speak to that and share what that looks like?
Yeah. I'm learning my way through, commercial world of industry and organization. So in the Army, I handicapped myself because I was given a mission, and my first reaction personally was to get it done and only use the things that were under my leadership, right? Only under my wire diagram, which is the structure of the organization that I'm in charge of.
Yes, sir.
And quite frankly, that was, I see a lot of officers, leaders in the Army make this mistake, because when you're younger, the problems are much, even though you think they're hard, they're really not hard. They're small. You're just experiencing them for the first time. You got to work your way through it. And if you're focused on your purpose and you're driven and, you're intellectually capable, most times than not, it's just easier to do it yourself, right? You might enact people to kind of move around and do something, but, at the end of the day, you're driving all the stuff. There becomes a time in the Army where that transitions. I personally think that happens between the ranks of captain and major, but maybe major and lieutenant colonel. It's not scientific. I just think there's a transition point where you really have to learn, one, how to, give orders, delegate responsibility, even though you're still accountable, but go do, let other people do. And inside of that, you have to learn how to really grow outside of the structure you control, right? Because, like General Milley, who was the chief or the chairman, he was the chief of the Army, but also the chairman. General Milley used to say, hey, we're not going to go to another war and it's going to be just the Army. It's going to be the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines. It's going to be Homeland Security. It's going to be Health and Human Services. It's going to be, the Transportation Department. It's going to be the collective, capabilities and capacities of America that win the war. Well, when you break that down, right, you really think through that. There's so much you can do if you're not worried about, as I think I referenced with you, if you're not worried about who gets the credit, right? If you're given a mission, but the best capability and capacity lives outside of your organization, well, then go figure out how to bring that a part of it and go do it as a team and go give them the credit, right? Even though it's your mission, you're responsible and accountable, right? I mean, I think I told you my father had this sign on his wall. I still have it. It says, a group of people can accomplish anything if nobody worries about who gets the credit.
Yes, sir.
Well, it's just that in bigger light. It's our own egos that constrain us to just ourselves and or what we're in charge of. It's if you can let go of your ego and focus on your purpose, then what and how you do it becomes really simple. Part of what you might do is build a team that, like OWS. If I walked in and said, I'm in charge, you can do exactly what I say. Maybe.
Yes, sir.
Maybe we would have gotten it done. I would tell you probably not.
I was going to say probably not.
Yeah. But because, I was willing to bring other experts in and use that capacity. I mean, there's a trucking industry that moves medical supplies around the nation, right? We have many, but three great ones that I was tracking. Well, why am I getting involved in the detail work of that? Hey, here's your mission. Here's how you fit into the plan. Come tell me how it's going to work. Here are the tenets I want you to plan against, and ready to go.
Yes, sir.
Right? I mean, and so it took me a little while to learn this. It's because of great leaders like Vince Brooks and J.D. Thurman and Ray Odierno, right? And Dave McKiernan and Kevin Burns, right? These great leaders that I work for, as you said, they have influence on us. I learned to go from me as the focal point to the team as the focal point. Still responsible and accountable, but a different way of getting it done.
Yes, sir. Well, I think that's a great way to end out our conversation, General Perna. It's always a pleasure to get to talk with you. I love your passion. I always learn so much from our conversations. Thank you, sir, for joining me on the Science of Leadership.
Tom, my pleasure. Call me anytime.
Yes, sir. Will do. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Science of Leadership. We hope today's discussion has inspired you and given you valuable insights to help you become a better leader. Remember, Leadership is about helping those we lead do great things. It's a journey of continual growth and learning. When we embrace that journey with curiosity, courage, and humility, we can confront challenges, overcome barriers, and foster environments where everyone can succeed. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow or subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with others who are passionate about leadership. Until next week, keep leading with character, competence, caring, and communication. This is Tom Collins. Let's keep growing.